So, hello, everybody. So, the theme that I'm going to be talking about today is that conversations about end of life are very important. And the two movies that I watched that gave me this idea for the theme was Endgame and Big Sick. So, to start with, going off of my theme, just for my introduction, I want to just start by explaining what exactly is end of life care and like what that can mean and look like for certain people and what does that mean in general. So end of life care can look different for everybody, but the general definition is the support and medical care given during the time surrounding death. So what that means is many people have many different options. They have many different wishes, support systems, whatever it may be that they can choose from. But the overall definition is just how can we support them in their last few months of life. So the topics that I will be discussing is the different options that a patient has when it comes to end of life care, who is responsible for these decisions, and how physicians go about having these difficult conversations. So all three of these will kind of tie into each other, but they really, I think, go well with this theme and based on the two movies that I watched. So in the documentary that I watched, Endgame, it was a very interesting documentary in the way of how this physician, he looks at death as a relationship and something to not be scared of. And these patients are death is inevitable for everybody, as we know. But for these patients, it's coming a lot sooner than us. And he teaches them hey, you need to have a relationship with death. You need to make friends with death because it's going to happen. And this is a very, very hard conversation for physicians to have, obviously. So generally speaking, people who are dying, they are needing care in 4 different areas overall, is what all of the research I have done based on this. And that's physical comfort, mental, emotional needs, and physical tasks, as well as spiritual needs. That can sometimes be looked past because it's not as open and that talked about, but spiritual needs are just as important as those as well. That was based on the National Institute on Aging in 2022. So what I'm also going to be talking about is living wills, power of attorney, advanced directives all play a huge role in deciding medical treatment. I will talk more about what those mean and why that's important, but that will also be talked about. Another thing that will be mentioned in this whole entire presentation is the 4-step approach discussing end of life care, as well as some struggle with the limitations of medicine, perceiving death as failure while others feel ill-equipped to initiate this conversation. This was another study talking to many physicians in 2019. So this is leading into my point 1. So this is the options that the patient is presented with. So we have palliative care, hospice care outside and inside the hospital. So we have kind of these two different, and the goal at this time is to meet all patients' needs during their final time. And like I said before, each patient is very different and has unique needs and requests. So this was huge. This main point I got from Endgame documentary, because not only is he teaching them to have a relationship with death, his main thing too is how can I help you in these last few months? So he talks to them through palliative care and hospice, and he tells them what their options are, what to be expected through these cares, and he lets the family and the patient decide which one would be best for them. Going to point number 2 now, this one is the legal instructions regarding your care. So this is a very interesting thing, and it's a little bit different from the patient deciding. It's actually very different from the patient deciding, because in the documentary Endgame, the patients were able to speak freely about what they're wanting at their end of life. But what can happen a lot of times is sometimes unpredictable events happen and you can't speak for yourself. So that's where living wills, advanced directives, and power of attorneys come in. So by having these in place, so a living will, this will say, here is what I want in this time when I can't speak for myself. That is what that means. Power of attorney, this is somebody where you have them in charge of your medical. So again, if you're in a coma, if you're unable to decide your own medical by providing your power of attorney, could be your spouse, could be your sibling, could be your kid, whatever it may be, they have that decision for you, whatever it may be. And having these conversations are super important and can help avoid arguments and conversations that are very difficult in the future. So, educating yourself on these terms, the palliative healthcare, hospice, living wills, advance directives, power of attorney, educating yourself on all of this will be the best option for your family, so that in these events that do occur, unfortunately, you're able to have a step ahead of this. So, what I also want is I want to tie in now the second movie that I watched, which was The Big Sick. And this one was very different from Endgame, but I found some similarities in a way. So Endgame, like I spoke before, it's a documentary and it follows this physician, and he's going around, he's talking to these patients, explaining about what they want for their end of life care. Big Sick, it's a fictional movie. I would say it's like a romantic comedy in a way. And what happens is this couple, and he ends up actually like falling for this girl, and they aren't together too long when she falls ill, like out of nowhere, and very ill. So she's like put in a coma. She can't speak for herself, nothing. And the relationship is still very new. And so the parents don't know this guy, but he's wanting to be there for her and support her. And, every so often he wants a little bit of say in what, the medical next move is to do, but he doesn't really have that say. But there's that conversation again that hasn't been had, as well as the whole main thing that I took from this movie is talking about these conversations. And the reason I've brought up this movie now is because it leads into my point 3. Physicians struggle with this conversation. So every physician must face the uncomfortable truth that not every condition is curable. This was from another study from Brown 2019. And this comes from physicians, family, everybody. And in the movie, The Big Sick, this conversation, for them to get through it, they use humor. And humor is how they got closer. They coped through all this difficult time while she was in the hospital, not knowing if she was going to make it. But that's a way for somebody to cope, because conversations about death are very, very hard to have. And in the movie The Big Sick, humor, comedy, all that was used in order to cope. So oftentimes it is up to the physician to initiate this conversation with their patients when the time is right. It's not easy for the patient. The physicians see it every day. It's still easy for them by any means, but they see it every day. They're the ones educated more on this topic and what to expect. So it's in their hands to initiate this difficult conversation. Like I said before, the thing that physicians really face is our medicine has come such a long way, our modern medicine, that we can cure diseases that we never thought in a million years would ever be cured. But death is inevitable, and it's something that us humans cannot always control. And that's something that physicians in this study that I researched faced, was that not only is this conversation so difficult to have with them because, somebody is passing away, but it's because it feels like it's out of their control, and they like to have that sense of control. So that really ties into both of those, because the end game was huge with that as well. Like, he talks about like how himself, that one of the doctors in that documentary, faced death as a college student, fell in train tracks and lost both his legs, and he faced it like there. So he has a little bit more insight than many other physicians will have, but that helps because he has that similarity in a sense of, I face death as well, I can tell you, here it is. And then that helps with that. So some suggestions for future consideration. Although this is a very difficult conversation to have, it is a very necessary one. And everybody needs to start having these conversations with their loved ones, because sometimes it's too late, sometimes things change, but if you do this now, it can help prevent some of these difficult conversations that will have to occur. So having that with your spouse, having that with your kids, having these things in place can help. Also, if physicians continue initiating this conversation to patients that are terminally ill, it will allow them more comfort because they will have some control and acceptance. That's the biggest thing that I just spoke about before. If they keep initiating these and, like you said in the documentary, have a relationship with death, it allows them to take some of that I have no control off, because you don't. But accepting it, that it's going to happen, will help. And all in all, death is scary, but it is inevitable. So thank you. And those are my 2 movies and my theme that I talked about.